I am so excited about this scene from the Bible that I just shared with you from the Gospel of Mark, because it's not just a story, it's a story sandwich. You get 2 stories for the price of 1. Okay, did anybody notice that? You get one story that starts out, this man named Jairus comes and wants healing for his daughter. But then you get another story wedged right in there, this woman sneaking in to get healed. And then you follow it with the other part of what happens to Jairus' daughter and how Jesus intervenes. You get a story sandwich. Does anybody like sandwiches? Can I get an amen for a sandwich? Okay, I tortured John Dahl because I was having him look for really good images of sandwiches. And I was doing this when he hadn't eaten lunch. And so he was looking through just Google images of sandwiches, and he was so starving. But we kept trying to find a really appetizing looking sandwich. So I want to walk through this story, kind of show you how this sandwich is built, and show you kind of how Jesus reveals God to us in this story. So Jesus is going out to this large crowd of people, and this man who is highly respected named Jairus, it just says he's a leader in the synagogue, in that place of worship. And he says, Jesus, come, my daughter is at the point of death. Just come and lay your hands on her so that she can be healed. And so Jesus follows Jairus through this crowd, but the crowd decides to come with him. So it's Jesus and this huge crowd heading to Jairus' house. But in this crowd, a woman sneaks in. This is a woman that we hear, she has been suffering from hemorrhages for 12 years. Now, this is kind of an uncomfortable medical condition. What this means is that she had a menstrual period that never stopped for 12 years. Now, not only is that a really horrible way to live, but it also made her unclean. Because back in that time, according to the Old Testament law, she was considered unclean and couldn't be a part of the community since she had this condition. Now, there was all sorts of laws governing who was clean and who was unclean. And basically, if you had any sort of sores or infections, diseases, anything not appealing, if you were throwing up, any yucky stuff coming out of you, you were unclean. And you were unclean the whole time that you had yucky things happening to you. And the reason they did this is because they wanted to protect the greater community from people who were sick and not have disease spread. But they also wanted only people who were clean and whole to be able to go and worship God in their place of worship. So if you're unclean, you can't do anything with your family or community, and you're not even good enough to be in the presence of God in this place of worship, so you have to remove yourself. Now, this woman had been removed for 12 years, and she tried every remedy, every cure, and nothing was helping. And she was desperate. She'd spent all of her money, and she'd heard of Jesus, and she wasn't supposed to be in this crowd because she was unclean, but she thought, if I just even touch his clothes, maybe I will be made well. Maybe I will be made clean again. And so that's what she did. She snuck into this crowd and she touched him. And she was healed. She felt in her body that she'd been healed in that moment. And instead of Jesus just continuing on or just kind of calling out over his shoulder, "You're welcome," whoever that was, he actually stopped. So he stopped and he said, "Who touched me?" And I don't know if Jesus is just trying to teach a lesson by that he really did know, but he wanted her to identify herself, or maybe he didn't know, but either way, he cared. He wanted to acknowledge who she was. And this woman knew that he had the power to heal her, which means he also had the power to condemn her, because she wasn't supposed to be there. She was unclean. And he wasn't going to give up, and so finally she presents herself, and she throws herself down on the ground, and she tells the whole truth. And he doesn't condemn her. He calls her daughter. Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease. I bet she hadn't been called daughter in 12 years. She was unclean. She was removed from her family. By Jesus calling her daughter, he gave her that title that means you are connected to a family. And she already knew she'd been healed. But what he did is he announced it to the whole crowd. This woman has been healed of her disease. He announced to everyone she is not unclean anymore. So he called her daughter and he connected her back into that group of people that she had been separated from for so long. But since Jesus took all this time to be with this woman and acknowledge her, this woman who wasn't even supposed to be there, the daughter of Jairus ends up dying. And some people come and say, no need to have Jesus come. Your daughter died. And Jesus says, do not fear, only believe, to the dad. Now, I don't know how the dad took that. What are you supposed to believe in that moment? I imagine he was just crushed with shock and grief. But Jesus is giving orders now and he's listening. So Jesus says, okay, crowd, you stay back. I'm just taking these 3 disciples and the Father, come on, let's go. And he works his way through this crowd of people who's already mourning for this young girl who died. And he says, no, she's not dead, she's just sleeping. Which they probably just thought either he was being cruel or really uninformed. But he works his way through all of this. And just the father and the mother and 3 disciples of his are able to be in this room. And Jesus does something significant. It says he takes the hand of this girl who had died. Now, Jesus had just been touched by an unclean woman, which makes him unclean and shows he's not afraid of that. So what we see is he is becoming unclean by touching this dead person. Because in addition to people who are sick and have diseases and bleeding and gross things happening to them, dead people are also considered unclean. It's not a good thing to touch dead people. But Jesus reaches in and touches her and says, little girl, get up. And she gets up. And it says they were overcome with amazement. Now, we don't know why. Then the next thing he says is, make sure not to tell anybody about this. We don't know why he said that, because obviously somebody told, because it's written here in the Bible and we're still reading it today. So word got out. But then the very next thing he says is, get her something to eat. Maybe go make her a sandwich. He wasn't just concerned with the fact that she was alive. He even wanted her to be taken care of and fed. This is a really amazing story sandwich. Now, if you eat a really good sandwich, you know that the inside stuff of your sandwich is really good and it's aided by the thing that holds it. Like, you really want good bread or a good wrap. You really want to have something good on the outside because it holds in the good stuff on the inside, and you need both to have it be a complete sandwich and a nourishing meal. This story does that for me. This is a story that can nourish us and nourish our faith. Now, a lot of people have been joining Good Shepherd lately, and a lot of people who have been a part of Good Shepherd are engaging in newer and deeper ways. And lately I've been getting a lot of questions of, how do I learn more about God? And who is this God that we believe in? And how do I start to read the Bible? And why does any of this matter? And how does this impact the way I live? I've been getting a lot of great questions about that lately. And I think it shows that people are hungry. People want to engage in their faith. They want to experience something that matters and something that can feed them. Well, one place to look, to really understand our faith in a deeper way, to dig in and to experience the power of God, is by reading through the Gospels, reading through stories like this in Mark. The Gospel books of the Bible are Matthew and Mark and Luke and John. And these 4 books of the Bible all tell us about the life of Jesus. They record the things he said and did, the healings, the miracles. They record how he died on the cross and how he was resurrected from the dead. So when we look at stories like this, where we see what Jesus says and does, we actually are seeing God revealed. And what does this story tell us about Jesus if we just look at his words and actions? In this story sandwich, we see Jesus as being someone who's not afraid to follow people into their desperate situations. Jesus isn't afraid to follow people into their lives. Jesus isn't afraid of being touched by people who are unclean. And Jesus isn't afraid of reaching out and touching the unclean. Jesus is someone who does most of his work outside of his place of worship. Now, Pastor Dan shared this in a sermon last year. It's a statistic that I don't know who did it, who looked at all these stories from the Bible, but they looked at all of the healing miracles of Jesus, and they found that, or all the miracles of Jesus, they found that 92% of them happen outside of the place of worship. Not inside the temple, not inside the synagogue, but outside of the place of worship. That's kind of a big deal. So that means if we want to learn something about what God is revealing through Jesus, is that God doesn't just meet us when we gather in a place like church. God actually meets us outside the doors of this place, in our lives, in our most desperate situations. God joins us in those places too. But that actually has some consequences for then how we live out our faith if we call ourselves followers of Jesus. If we call ourselves the hands and feet of Jesus in the world, that means we actually have to go and live out our faith through our words and actions outside the walls of this place. We come here to get fed, we come here to worship and praise, and we go out of this place, and then we live out our faith in our words and our actions. I got to hear a speaker named Jeff Henderson at a conference with some of our other staff this past spring, and I have a quote of what he said. He said, "A neighbor-minded church is more about the church going to the community and not the community going to church." We love the community coming to church, but actually we make a bigger impact when we go out of the church to the community. And it's when we heard this pastor speak that we started thinking, we need to focus on this, what it means to be the church. That's why we're doing For Fargo Moorhead, because we believe God is for us. God comes to us into every situation of our lives. And then God also asks us to go out and be for our neighbors and to actually reveal God and God's love through our words and actions outside the doors of this place. That's a pretty big thing. But I want to tell you just the part of this story that really has impacted me the most. It's about this woman. She's kind of the meat of the sandwich for me, the woman who had been suffering from hemorrhages. When she was healed, and when Jesus was looking around and saying, "Who touched me?" when she came forward, she was terrified that Jesus would condemn her. And it says that she threw herself at his feet and she told him the whole truth. Now that almost sounds like she's confessing to a crime or something. And it was a crime. According to the laws of that day, she was unclean. She shouldn't have been there. But I think, well, what did she actually confess? She confessed that she had been sick, that she was desperate, that she had tried many things, that nothing worked. She confessed that Jesus was her last hope, and she put her last ounce of faith into him, and he healed her. That doesn't sound like the confession to a crime. That sounds like a beautiful and powerful confession of faith. And it makes me just in awe of the fact that if we as the church are going out to be for our neighbors, we might hear some of these stories too. Some of these confessions, when we choose to go out and serve others and love others through our words and actions, reveal Christ to them, that we might actually hear some of these stories where people say the whole truth of the things that they have struggled through and where they've met Jesus. And we might actually meet Jesus out in those places too. That's really exciting to me, when we actually get to go and be the church. Now I want to challenge all of you with one really cool opportunity. we're going to have a chance to serve this Sunday. And just 2 shifts from 10 to noon or noon to 2 at Churches United or Dorothy Day or YWCA or the New Life Center. And these are places where we are going to intentionally go out and serve through our words and actions. And these shelters are so excited to have people come taking part in painting and landscaping and cleaning and food prep. And we could really go out and serve and hear people's stories and be the church. And if you take anything from this sermon and want something for your sermon notes, how about this? People are hungry and Jesus has sandwiches. And Jesus says, go out and serve people sandwiches because they're hungry. Amen.